Morning, morning, morning. Good morning. Good morning to you.
Well, let's get going this morning at 8.5 minutes after 6 o'clock in our conversations on CARICOM. And for this, as always, we're joined by Barbados Ambassador to CARICOM, His Excellency David Comissiong. Ambassador, good morning.
Morning, Pearson. You've given me a riddle to think about for the rest of the day.
Gotcha, good. And I like that because I love the fact that I like when people get it wrong. You should know this by now, so that it continues, but it creates conversation.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of conversation, and that's what we're about. But we're on a different conversation
A different
now.
riddle.
Totally, indeed. We're having our conversations on CARICOM because he came, the U.S. Secretary of State, and he would have met with leaders of the region. Can you give us some insight as to what was discussed?
Well, his stated purpose for coming was to advance President Trump's foreign policy priorities in relation to the Caribbean. So it was an interesting experience because we were hearing firsthand where this new Trump administration is going in relation to the Caribbean. And, you know, during a couple of days before he came, we got a new revelation of that policy when the Trump administration announced that it is going in the direction of imposing penalties on Chinese shipping companies or even other shipping companies that have Chinese-built ships. And whether it's a Chinese shipping company or a shipping company that has Chinese-built ships that goes into a U.S. port, that they are proposing to impose penalties ranging from US $1 million to as high as, I think, $3.5 million. And of course, that caused consternation in our region because it has very negative consequences for us. So that became part of the conversation when he came. So he met, he came, he went to Jamaica, he went to Guyana, he went to Suriname. He met with the national leaders of those three countries, and they had their own bilateral conversations. But he also met with the current chair of CARICOM, Prime Minister Motley, who traveled to Jamaica to meet with him, to speak from a CARICOM perspective. So the fact that he chose those countries, well, clearly one of the Trump administration's priorities is the oil and gas resources of Guyana and Suriname. And, Pearson, as I said, it was an opportunity for us to get a deeper understanding of where the Trump administration is going and how we need to respond to where the Trump administration is going. One of the big issues that was on the table as he came into the Caribbean was this issue of the Cuban medical corporation. And, well, we know the position that the U.S. had put out prior to Mr. Rubio coming. And I think the way this issue played out is very instructive because we know what happened. Our leaders said what they had to say. Our foreign ministers met with the Assistant Secretary of State for this hemisphere, explained to him the realities of this cooperation. Prime Minister Motley, Prime Minister Gonzalez, Prime Minister Rowley also made their positions clear. But it's interesting how, against that background, how he eventually responded to this issue. And what I would like to do is just to read his words, just to read his words. So in Jamaica, at the press conference, the question was put to him by a Jamaican journalist, Secretary Rubio. My question is, in relation to the matter of the Cuban Medical Cooperation Program, the medical mission has been a cornerstone of health in Jamaica and the Caribbean for over 50 years. How does the U.S. reconcile its stance on this program with the region's reliance on Cuban medical professionals. And this is how he answered. He says, yeah, well, I think the first thing is to separate the medical from the labor issues that we are pointing to, okay? This is not about doctors. This is not about the provision of medical assistance. We have no problem with medical assistance, and we don't have a problem with doctors. We have a problem, and I'm not speaking about Jamaica. We have discussed this today about following international labor standards and the like. But I'm talking about this program in general, how it's operated around the world. And how it's operated around the world is that basically the doctors are not paid. Now, there are places that have better labor standards. Perhaps Jamaica is one of those, and that's fine. But I'm describing generally what the program has been. Every country operates their program differently. And obviously, because of our relationship with Jamaica, we are going to engage with them on that and talk about it further and have a better understanding. Perhaps none of this applies in the way it's handled here. End of quote. So I think his words actually speak for themselves. And he's mentioning Jamaica because he's in Jamaica, but those words apply
To the region.
to the region. So there's a lesson in that for us, Pearson.
Yes.
There's a lesson in that. We stood unified. We had one position. We articulated that position, and we explained our reality. Look, this is our truth. This is our reality. This is what the interests of our people demands, and this is where we stand. And, if you proceed the way you said you're going to proceed, well, we don't, but this is where we stand. And that has obviously had an impression. And so I think that is a great takeaway for me. And I think an important part of it, Pearson, is that the Caribbean people were obviously behind the positions that our leaders took.
Yes.
Because the Caribbean people know the Cuban Medical Corporation, and they know what benefit it has brought to us. And so I think that is one of the takeaways for me. And clearly, we are going to face some challenges with the foreign policy of the Trump administration. We can perhaps discuss that because I think the policy that they're pursuing is it's a hark back to American foreign policy of the 19th century.
Indeed.
Where the Monroe Doctrine, the system of the American system of political economy. We could discuss that, and that is going to produce some challenges for us. But I think this was a great example of how we have to deal with those challenges and simply, say to the Americans, look, you have come up with your policy, but you need to know that your policy may have negative effects for us, and you need to be aware of this. And you need to take that into account.
As I listened to his response as read by you, I got the sense that he was walking back away from the position initially set, where he says, well, it's really not about the medical program. Now you're hearing that. At first you were hearing, the medical program is about the, what's the word, labor.
Yes, forced labor.
Forced labor, right.
And human trafficking. And
correct.
So forth,
And
yes.
then suddenly now he has a different position or articulated a different position by the Trump administration. So that's a good response, I think. For now, of course, we'll have to test those words and see how true they really are. But then I want to look at the whole question then of the imposition of tariffs on our access to goods out of China.
Yes. But again, and I think that just like with the Cuban Medical Corporation, I think we are approaching this in a very similar manner. Very united. We are speaking with one voice. And just as we did with the Cuban Medical Program, we are explaining to them our truth, our reality, and how it will affect the interests of our people. And I want to point out the work that has been done by the Caribbean Private Sector Organization. the CPSO. The CPSO is something, when Prime Minister Motley came on board in 2018, she urged the Caribbean private sector, look, establish this regional body so that you could speak with one voice and we can make you an associate institution of CARICOM. And that was Prime Minister Motley's vision, and it was done. They came together, they established a CPSO, and in fact, the first mission she gave to the CPSO, she said, look, work with us on the 25 by 25 food import reduction program. But the point is, we now have this Caribbean private sector organization, and we have seen the value of that organization because immediately the U.S. Trade Representative, the Office of the Trade Representative, which is an office within the presidency that deals with these trade-related matters. As soon as they announced that they were heading in that direction, the representatives of the CPSO were in Washington, engaging with them and explaining to them the consequences, the negative consequences this will have with us. Prime Minister Motley, it was revealed that she has written directly to President Trump explaining the consequences. And for those of us who may not be aware, the consequences are that if you impose these fees, particularly on companies or vessels that are coming to the Caribbean, that are, have come out of an American port but are coming to the Caribbean, it will drive up the freight costs that affect us. It will probably double them, and it will have a serious inflationary effect on all of the imports that come into the Caribbean. And it will drive up, it will be worse for us than anybody else because, okay, a ship coming out of China, let's say for the United States, might come with 16,000 containers, right? So when you apply that $1 million across 16,000 containers, the increase in the cost is very it's minimal. Coming out of China, 16,000. But a ship coming to the Caribbean is going to come with, because we are much smaller, it's going to come with 500, maybe 1,000. So when you apply that $1 million, $2 million penalty across that much smaller level of containers, it is tremendously, raising the freight costs, which will be passed on to us. So once again, I think that just like we did with the Cuban medical program, we are hearing the CARICOM speaking with one voice, not just the leadership, but also our private sector. And I guess we will have to wait and see whether, just as that approach on the Cuban Medical Corporation appeared to get through, to have some effect, that similarly we will get through and have some effect on this issue of the Chinese shipping.
Narco trafficking, because the perception, it seems, by North America is that the Caribbean area is a very valid and very vibrant transshipment point. Was that a matter of discussion?
Well, I think if there is one area on which he came to advance the Trump administration's priorities. But I think if there's one area in which their priority is a priority of ours as well, is that area of security. Because there is quite a bit of security cooperation in our region between CARICOM and the United States. And in fact, we have been saying to them, look, we need much more cooperation, particularly in relation to guns, American-made, manufactured guns coming into our region and causing so much havoc. So yes, we do have the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative. We have a lot of security cooperation, and so that was one issue on which we're fine. Yes, let us sit down. That's a priority for us as well. In fact, coinciding with him coming to the Caribbean was the official opening in Barbados of 2 new facilities of the regional security system, one of which a new logistics hub at Paragon, was a gift of the U.S. government. Of course, that would be the Biden administration. But yes, so that was one area that hopefully the two priorities coincide, and we will enhance the cooperation. But you know, as I said, one of the reasons that we have to pay a lot of attention to where the Trump administration is going to be going is that it seems to me that they are harking back to the policies of the 19th century, and we need to be aware of those policies. So in you know, in the 19th century, I mean, the United States was a relatively new nation, young, just gotten its independence, now beginning to develop. And they came with two policies. President Monroe in 1823 came with something called the Monroe Doctrine, where they said, this region is our backyard. Europe, you European countries that are accustomed to having colonies and accustomed to having your imperialism in this region is off limits to you. This region is our sphere of influence, our backyard. Of course, back then, we were simply colonies. Secondly, at that time in the 19th century, Britain had this free trade system, British free trade, where Britain had an empire. So Britain was all about free trade. The Americans said, no, we are opposing British free trade. We are coming with something called the American system of political economy. Well, the American system of political economy said that the United States was going to put up a tariff wall, high tariffs around their national economy. They were going to look inward. They were going to be protecting these infant American industries, protecting them from competition from outside, from British free trade, for example. And they were going to focus their attention on developing their national industries, developing American infrastructure, roads, canals, eventually the railroad system, and so forth. So that was the policy of the 19th century, the American system of political economy. But the Americans, as they got stronger, they too became champions of free trade. And they went on in the 20th century not only to champion free trade, but to champion multilateralism, the development of the League of Nations, the development of the United Nations and the whole multilateral system. Now, the Trump administration seems to be jumping backwards over the UN and all that multilateralism back to those 19th century doctrines of Monroe Doctrine and the American system of political economy. So we need to understand this. We need to understand that history, because if we understand that history, we will have deeper insights into where they are coming from. But it has implications for us, because we now, just like, we began our history, our modern history, just like the U.S. We were all British colonies, They brought together these British colonies, they formed one nation, they became strong, and then they have relations all over the world, That's the path that we are on now. We have come together in our Caribbean community. We are trying to become a strong unit. And we too have decided that we have to, just as they broke out of that British orbit, a couple of centuries ago, and look to the rest of the world, we too have decided we have to diversify. So we are now in the process of developing relations with Africa, with Latin America, with the Middle East, with China. Many of our countries have signed on to the Chinese Belt and Road program, and so forth. So this is where we are going to have a mature conversation with the Americans, with the Trump administration, because this idea that this region is somehow, the Americans' backyard. No. You can't. There's a classic American novel by Thomas Wolfe. The title is "You Can't Go Home Again." In other words, you can't really go back to the past. You can't, because the world has moved on. And so we are going to have some very mature conversations about this. But the good news for me, Pearson, is when you look at how we have started with the Cuban medical program, with the issue of these Chinese tariffs, I think CARICOM is approaching it in the right way. We are speaking in a unified way, with a degree of resolution, very, very clear, very firm. This is our truth. This is our reality. These are our national interests, and let's have that conversation, and let's come up with something. Let's come up with something that we all can live with, because that's basically what Prime Minister Motley said to President Trump. Your policy is going to have very negative impacts with us. Let us work out something where that does not happen, where we don't face these negative consequences. So it's like a riddle, a puzzle, and we have just begun to see how we can work out this puzzle.
Yeah, we've only just begun. So keep an eye on this space, because the conversations on CARICOM will continue to update you on what's happening as it unfolds before us, this relationship between us and them, how CARICOM stands up to represent the peoples of the region against what sometimes could feel like oppressive positions. Thank you so much, Ambassador Comissiong, for joining us this morning.
Morning, morning, morning. Good morning. Good morning to you.